There's a story about a young man who called me once, almost embarrassed by how excited he sounded. He had just crossed a line he'd been staring at for years. $10,000 in savings. Not inherited. Not a bonus. Earned slowly, paycheck by paycheck, with discipline and a lot of saying no. But instead of feeling proud, he felt anxious. Because the moment he reached it, a new question appeared. What am I supposed to do with this now? Here's what's interesting about that feeling. The first $10,000 is rarely about money. It's about identity. For the first time, you stop seeing yourself as someone who's just getting by, and you start wondering whether one decision could define your future. Should you invest it? Spend it? Protect it? Multiply it? Not mess it up? This is where most advice goes wrong. People talk about returns, strategies, and optimization, but that's not what this moment is actually about. This moment is about fear, confidence, and how fragile progress feels when you're just starting. Nobody talks about this, but the first real savings milestone is often more stressful than being broke. When you're broke, there's nothing to lose. When you have something, loss suddenly becomes real. That brings us to the first idea. The most important thing your first $10,000 should buy is not growth. It should buy safety. Think about it this way. Before this point, your life probably had very little margin for error. A surprise bill, a short gap in income, a small emergency could throw everything off balance. That kind of financial fragility does something to your brain. It keeps you in survival mode. Psychologically, survival mode narrows your thinking. You focus on the next problem, not the long-term picture. You optimize for relief, not progress. That's not a personal failure. It's how humans evolved. Historically, this has always been true. People who lived on the edge, whether farmers 100 years ago or gig workers today, didn't fail because they lacked intelligence. They struggled because they had no buffer. One bad season could undo years of effort. Here's the paradox. The safest use of money often feels like the least productive one. Putting your first savings aside, untouched, earning very little, feels boring. It doesn't come with a great story. There's no bragging rights, no exciting upside. But what it quietly does is remove panic from your decision-making. The invisible part is this. When you know you can survive a mistake, you start making better choices. Not riskier ones, better ones. I know people who rushed to invest their first savings aggressively because they wanted to feel smart. When markets moved against them, they didn't just lose money, they lost confidence. And once confidence breaks early, it takes years to rebuild. That's why the first job of your first $10,000 is to protect your progress, not prove your intelligence. Which leads to the second idea. Your first $10,000 is not an investment portfolio. It's a permission slip. Permission to say no to bad jobs. Permission to wait instead of panic. Permission to think long-term. Here's what's interesting about that. Money's greatest return at the beginning isn't financial. It's psychological. When people talk about financial freedom, they usually imagine some distant future number. But the earliest form of freedom shows up much sooner. It shows up when you don't need every decision to work perfectly. Think about how many people stay in situations they hate because they can't afford a single month of uncertainty. Bad jobs, toxic environments, unsafe living arrangements. It's not because they lack ambition. It's because they lack options. The first $10,000 creates options. Quiet ones, invisible ones. Historically, people who had even small reserves of wealth behaved differently from those who didn't. They could delay gratification. They could take calculated risks. They could wait for opportunities instead of chasing them. The paradox here is simple. The money that gives you the most freedom early on is the money you don't touch. Nobody celebrates that. But it's true. This is also why copying what experienced investors do can be dangerous at this stage. Someone with $1 million can afford volatility. Someone with $10,000 cannot, at least not emotionally. Losses hit differently when they represent years of effort instead of a rounding error. And nobody's crazy for feeling that difference. Your brain doesn't see percentages. It sees stories. It sees time. It sees sacrifice. Which brings us to the third idea. Your first $10,000 should not be used to chase returns. It should be used to build habits. Here's a story I've seen play out many times. Two people reach the same savings milestone. One immediately asks, "How do I make this grow faster?" The other asks, "How did I get here? And how do I repeat it?" Over time, the second person usually ends up wealthier, not because they found better investments, but because they understood their own behavior. The invisible wealth here is self-knowledge. Understanding how you saved your first $10,000 tells you far more about your future than any market forecast. Did you do it through discipline or luck? Consistency or burst of effort? Stability or stress? That matters because money compounds behaviors before it compounds dollars. Psychologically, habits formed early become defaults. If your first experience with money is calm, patient, and intentional, you carry that forward. If it's frantic and reactive, that compounds too. Here's the paradox. The best way to grow money later is to slow down with it now. Modern examples are everywhere. People who jump into investing before they understand themselves often end up hopping strategies, reacting to noise, and burning out. People who build emotional resilience first tend to stay invested longer, which matters more than almost anything else. Nobody talks about this, but staying in the game beats being brilliant for a short time. This is why the first $10,000 is less about maximizing and more about stabilizing. Less about impressing others and more about aligning with who you actually are. I struggle with this too. There's always a temptation to do something with money just so it doesn't feel idle. Action feels responsible. Stillness feels wasteful. But the truth is, stillness at the right moment can be the most responsible move of all. When you step back, the question changes. It's no longer what should I do with this money. It becomes what kind of person do I want to be with money? Because the first $10,000 isn't the start of your wealth. It's the foundation of your relationship with it, and that relationship matters more than any single decision. There's a story about a woman who did everything right after saving her first real chunk of money. Not pocket change, not a few $100s, real savings. The kind that took years of discipline, missed dinners out, and saying no to things she wanted. When she finally crossed that number, she felt proud and immediately uneasy. She did what most smart people do. She read the books, followed sensible advice, spread her money across investments that sounded reasonable. Nothing reckless, nothing exotic. For a while, it worked. The numbers went up. Slowly, then faster. And then something small went wrong. Not a crash, not a disaster, just a normal downturn. The kind that barely registers on a long-term chart. But emotionally, it hit harder than she expected. She checked her account more often. Read headlines she normally ignored. Every red number felt personal. Eventually, she sold. Not because her plan was broken, but because her nerves were. Here's what's interesting about that. The failure wasn't financial. It was psychological. The strategy didn't match the person using it. That brings us to the fourth idea. What you do with your first $10,000 should match your tolerance for uncertainty, not your ambition. Most financial advice quietly assumes that people are calm, rational machines, that once you understand how markets work, you'll behave logically. But money doesn't live in a spreadsheet. It lives in your head. Money is tied to safety, identity, status, control. When those things feel threatened, logic often disappears. Not because you're weak, because you're human. Evolution explains why. Our brains evolved in environments where loss could mean death. Losing resources wasn't an inconvenience, it was danger. So our minds react to losses far more strongly than gains. Losing something you worked hard for hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the same amount feels good. That wiring doesn't disappear just because you opened a brokerage account. Historically, this pattern has always existed. People protected what they had long before they tried to grow it. In uncertain environments, preservation mattered more than optimization. The instinct to defend came before the desire to expand. You see the same thing today, when markets wobble, when layoffs make headlines, when incomes feel less predictable. Even smart, informed people suddenly feel the urge to retreat. Nobody's crazy for this. Here's the paradox. The best investment on paper can be the worst investment in real life if it causes you stress. Stress changes behavior, and behavior matters more than strategy. A mediocre plan you can stick with beats a brilliant plan you abandon at the wrong time, every time. This is why early money should prioritize emotional durability over maximum return. You don't need to squeeze every possible dollar out of your first investments. You need a plan that doesn't make you panic during boring months or scary ones. The invisible part here is sleep. If your money decisions keep you awake at night, they're too aggressive for where you are right now. That doesn't mean they're wrong forever. It means they're wrong for this stage of your life. Which leads to the fifth idea. Your first $10,000 should teach you how it feels to own assets, not how to beat the market. Think about learning any new skill. You don't start at full speed. You don't expect mastery on day one. You experiment. You make small mistakes. You notice how you react under pressure. Money works the same way. The early stage isn't about performance. It's about exposure. I know people who waited years to invest because they were terrified of doing it wrong. They wanted certainty before acting, but certainty never arrived. And by waiting, they missed years of learning how markets actually feel. I also know people who rushed in too fast. They went all in emotionally before they understood themselves. The first serious loss scared them so badly that they never came back. Both groups made the same mistake. They treated investing as a test of intelligence instead of a process of self-discovery. The lesson isn't how markets work. The lesson is how you work. Modern investing culture skips this step. It jumps straight to optimization. Better returns, better timing, better strategies. But optimization assumes stability, and early financial life is rarely stable. Careers change. Expenses surprise you. Confidence comes and goes. Emotional reactions are unpredictable. Here's the paradox. Treating early investing as practice rather than performance often leads to better long-term results. When you frame your first investments as learning tools, everything shifts. Losses become information instead of failures. Gains become encouragement instead of proof of genius. You stay curious instead of defensive. Nobody talks about this, but confidence with money doesn't come from always being right. It comes from surviving being wrong and realizing you're still okay. That's invisible wealth. You can't download it. You can't shortcut it. You earn it by participating, slowly and deliberately, through different market moods. This is also where comparison quietly causes damage. You see others online talking about huge wins, perfect timing, incredible returns. What you don't see are the losses, the stress, the sleepless nights, or the fact that their goals and circumstances are completely different from yours. There's a difference between what works and what works for you. Wise use of early money respects that difference. That's why diversification at the beginning isn't just a financial idea. It's an emotional one. Spreading decisions reduces regret. It gives you room to learn without one choice defining your entire experience. Learning is the real objective here. Your first $10,000 is not the moment to prove anything. It's the moment to build trust with yourself. Trust that you can make decisions without panicking. Trust that setbacks won't knock you out of the game. Trust that progress doesn't require perfection. Once that trust exists, everything else becomes easier. Investing feels calmer. Saving feels steadier. Goals become clearer. Let's pause here because this is where most people rush ahead and miss the point. The market will still be there later. Opportunities will come again. But your behavior patterns are being shaped right now. And over time, those patterns matter far more than the numbers on a statement. There's a story about two people who both reached the same milestone early in their lives. Each saved $10,000. Same number, same effort, very different outcomes. The first person treated it like a finish line, proof that they were finally doing well. They immediately asked a dangerous question: how do I turn this into more, as fast as possible? Every decision that followed was filtered through speed and comparison. What are others doing? What am I missing? Why isn't my money working harder? The second person treated the same amount very differently. They saw it as insulation, a buffer between them and bad luck, something that gave them options rather than pressure. Their question wasn't how to grow it quickly, but how to make it useful. Here's what's interesting about that. The difference wasn't knowledge, it was intention. That brings us to the sixth idea. The most important job of your first $10,000 is not growth. It's protection. This is counterintuitive because we're taught to view money primarily as something that should be productive. Sitting still feels lazy. Uninvested money feels wasted. But early in your financial life, the biggest risks you face aren't low returns. They're fragility, unexpected expenses, job changes, health issues, bad timing. These are the things that derail people, not a few percentage points of performance. Historically, this has always been true. For most of human history, people didn't build wealth by maximizing returns. They built it by surviving bad years. The farmers who lasted weren't the ones who squeezed every ounce from the land. They were the ones who kept reserves for droughts. Modern life disguises this truth because disasters don't look like disasters anymore. They look like credit card balances, emergency expenses, forced decisions made under pressure. Here's the paradox. Money that earns less but gives you flexibility can be more valuable than money that earns more but traps you. The invisible part of early wealth is optionality, the ability to wait, the ability to say no, the ability to handle a setback without it cascading into a crisis. Your first $10,000 can be the difference between taking a bad job because you're desperate and waiting for a better one, between selling investments at the worst moment and holding through uncertainty, between panic and patience. Nobody talks about this because it's boring. Protection doesn't look impressive. It doesn't make good screenshots, but it quietly prevents disasters. I know people who made suboptimal financial choices early on, yet ended up doing better than their peers. Not because they were smarter, but because they avoided situations where one mistake could ruin everything. They built buffers. They lowered pressure. They bought themselves time. Time is an invisible form of wealth, which leads to the seventh and final idea. What you do with your first $10,000 sets your relationship with money for decades. This isn't about the specific allocation. It's about the story you tell yourself. If your first meaningful savings teaches you that money is a scorecard, you'll spend years chasing numbers that never feel like enough. Every gain will raise expectations. Every setback will feel like failure. If it teaches you that money is a tool, the experience is different. Money becomes something that supports your life instead of judging it. Here's the paradox. The earlier you stop trying to prove something with money, the faster progress tends to follow. Because proving things creates pressure. Pressure leads to mistakes. Mistakes compound. Wise early money decisions reduce emotional load. They make future choices calmer. They create a foundation where growth can happen without fear. I struggle with this too. There's always a temptation to treat milestones as verdicts, to think that a number defines competence or worth. It doesn't. It just reflects a moment in time. When you step back, the question of what to do with your first $10,000 becomes clearer. It's not about picking the perfect move. It's about avoiding moves that corner you. It's about creating a margin for error while you're still learning who you are with money. Because you will change. Your goals will change. Your tolerance for risk will change. The plan that makes sense today might not fit you 5 years from now. Your first savings should allow for that evolution, not fight it. Let's come full circle. At the beginning, we talked about how reaching your first big savings milestone can feel exciting and unsettling at the same time. Pride mixed with fear. Possibility mixed with pressure. That feeling is normal. The mistake is thinking the next step has to be dramatic. Most financial disasters don't come from bad intentions. They come from moving too fast before understanding yourself, from copying others without accounting for your own psychology, from optimizing before stabilizing. The quiet truth is this. The most powerful thing your first $10,000 can buy is confidence that you're okay. Okay if returns are boring. Okay if progress is slow. Okay if life throws something unexpected your way. Once you have that, everything else compounds more smoothly. You make better decisions because you're not rushed. You take smarter risks because you can afford to be patient. You stay in the game long enough for compounding to actually work. If this changed how you think about early money, don't rush to act. Just notice. Notice whether your financial choices are trying to impress or trying to protect. Notice where pressure is coming from. Notice whether your money is giving you freedom or demanding attention. Because the goal of your first $10,000 was never to turn it into $1 million overnight. The goal was to build a foundation strong enough to support whatever comes next. And when you get that right, the rest tends to follow quietly, steadily, and over time.